What is a hobby that sounds expensive, but is actually quite cheap to get into? Story 1. Playing a musical instrument sounds expensive, but it really isn't when you think about it. Say you wanted to learn the acoustic guitar. Yeah, you're going to have to drop some money on an acoustic, but if you take care of it, other than changing strings, there's really no reason to ever have to upgrade your instrument. People usually make the hobby expensive by wanting to buy all the different doodads that are out there. Answer. Speaking of guitar, you can also just get a cheap one used and be set for life. Of course, you'll want a better one, and there are plenty of reasons to get a better one. Don't me about why better guitars are better. I already agree, but you don't strictly have to. Story 2. Fishing. Believe me, the internet makes it seem like it's expensive, but that's a mix of showmanship and addictive spending. The hobby itself can be quite affordable. I found rod and reel sets at yard sales and on FB Marketplace as cheap as $5. Hooks to basic lures can be had at Walmart for like $1.50 to $5. And honestly, that, and maybe a set of needle-nose pliers, is all you actually need, alongside a license. Don't fall victim to thinking you need the fancy bullshit online to have fun. It doesn't take a boat and 200 swim baits to catch fish and enjoy your time in nature. Answer. This is true, and while it can get stupid expensive, a lot of super good gear can be obtained at yard sales. I live near the beach, and it's mind-blowing how many incredible rods and reels I find on the side of the road because vacationers didn't want to lug them home. A couple of weeks ago, I found an Abu Garcia Veritas rod at a yard sale for $10. A couple of bait keeper hooks, a couple of barrel swivels, a few drop weights, and some minnows, and I get a whole day of enjoyment and something tasty to eat. Story 3. Art collecting. I go to thrift stores and scrounge around looking for cool art that people sometimes donate. 99.99% of the stuff there is mass-produced decor art, but once in a while you find a diamond in the rough. Story 4. Expensive and inexpensive hobbies are rather relative. Astronomy can be done by just standing outside. There are some fantastic free apps that will tell you what you're looking at. And a second-hand pair of binoculars or a telescope can be had for under $100. I do a lot of sailing, and a well-used but serviceable 28-foot sailing yacht that when new would have cost an equivalent of $100,000 can be bought for under $5,000. That seems very cheap to me for what you get in return. But if you can't afford to pay rent or buy anything other than staple food ingredients, everything must feel out of reach. Story 5. Hiking. The All Trails app is free and shows hundreds of routes around your local area. Great way to explore new places. And the upfront cost is a pair of decent walking boot shoes and maybe a rain jacket and backpack. But most of the time, people already own these. Story 6. Retro gaming. Sure, people shell out hundreds and thousands to complete their sets of physical copies of consoles and games, but there are dozens upon dozens of emulation devices, starting at less than 50, that can handle thousands of retro games. Source. Me, LOL. I just got one and am having a great time reliving some games I played as a child. Story 7. Super unpopular opinion, but the people have to know. Miniature painting and war games. Yes, even Warhammer. The hobby is set up to make you want to spend thousands of dollars to get started. The reality is you can find something you like looking at, but a set of 10 minis for $45 on Amazon. Grab a basic set of hobby paints and brushes for another $50 to $100 and spend many hours painting those things to your heart's content. If you buy into a cheap discount box for around $140, you can spend literal months assembling and painting that fudge. It only becomes expensive when you don't focus on the artistic side of things and you end up buying more and more unassembled models. Story 8. Maybe divisive, but shooting. Many people that are super into guns spend many thousands and thousands of dollars on really nice guns and high-end ammunition if they shoot regularly. However, you can also buy a Ruger 1022, 10-round magazine that shoots 22 LR ammo for around $200 or so, and the ammo is dirt cheap. It is endless amounts of fun. Also, if you really cared about this, it's a hell of a lot more effective as a home defense weapon than a frying pan. Getting hit with 10 rounds of 22 would suck really bad. Story 9. Sailing. Cheaper than you think if you live near a sailing club that races. You just need non-marking shoes and wet weather gear, and some sailing gloves to start. You can buy expensive stuff later. Most sailing clubs have a racing sailing evening during the week like Wednesday, or a sailing day during the weekend like Sunday, where if you go and talk, you might find yourself a ride. You don't need to own a boat. Lots of boats need crew like foredeck or a grinder, someone to haul in lines, or somebody to be rail meat on a larger boat. You don't have to do much. You just have to flatten the boat out. You can take lessons in a small boat class to get the basics, or just hang around during the races. It's usually round the buoy races in the summertime. Also, the sailing community tends to be fairly serious about sailing, so be sure to tell them you're a novice. Good luck and happy sailing. Answer: if you crew on a sailboat, it's eventually cash flow positive, since the owner, who typically steers, pays for everything, including crew lunches and drinks, as well as the boat itself, maintenance, entry fees, etc. You're on the hook for your own clothes, but you can often get used foul weather gear for $100 or less. Or hit your club's lost and found. Find something that fits, give the gear a good wash or two, and you're set. Other stuff like glasses, baseball cap, warm layers, and beanie, you can get an outdoor store like REI. Always avoid marine stores since they mark up prices. Free meals every weekend, and you get to enjoy a teamwork-oriented sport with good camaraderie. Hard to find anything cheaper. Even a gym is more expensive at $50 or more per month. Story 10. Bush wreck hunting. It's a hobby my nephew and I invented. I'm not wealthy, far from it. My 10-year-old nephew comes from a wealthy family. He has all the expensive toys and Lego, etc. I can't afford any of that. He often comes to stay with me out in the country, Australia, and we find cheap, fun things to do. Recently, we decided to drive around randomly in the bush on old logging tracks from way back in the day. I live in a region surrounded by vast forests, and we look for old abandoned cars, which has been pretty successful. He gets a thrill out of finding them, and I get satisfaction trawling Google Earth, looking for potential spots where people may have dumped old cars. Last trip, he took some power tools and removed some parts as souvenirs. I'm not too sure his parents are terribly thrilled with him decorating his room with rusty old steering wheels and such. Cost: cheap. A bit of fuel in the old 4x4 and some lunch at a local bakery. Story 11. Bird watching. While it can get expensive if you go the top-of-the-line optics route, you can easily get a decent pair of binoculars and a field guide for under a couple $100. Add to that apps like Merlin that are free and help ID birds based on pictures and even song. Story 12. Alpinism. People immediately envision rock climbing and skiing and ice climbing and glacier traversal. And, yeah, that requires thousands of dollars in gear. But good old-fashioned find a peak and walk up it scrambling? You need a set of sturdy, grippy shoes and some decent trekking poles. It'll maybe cost you $200 in gear. Most of your expenses will be your gas bill, getting to and from the bases of various summits. Story 13. Plane car train spotting. Yes, I know, it's very nerdy, but if your local airport has a viewing platform, you can have a blast on a summer's eve watching big jets come in. No pressure to have a big expensive camera. Your phone could probably do just fine. This also extends to photography in general. Film cameras or second-hand DSLRs can be really cheap, and you will 100% be surprised how decent photos turn out if you really get stuck in. Story 14. Astronomy. It sounds like you need a NASA budget and a 3000 telescope, but you can literally just go outside and look up. A free stargazing app like Stellarium or Sky Guide will show you what's what, and a cheap pair of binoculars lets you see craters on the moon and Jupiter's moons. Story 15. Adult coloring. Seems like a very cheap hobby, but once you see that the coloring books are like $15 each, and the marker sets everyone online seems to use are like $40, it doesn't seem so cheap for something you don't even know if you'll dig. I ended up at Ollie's, where those same books are only $3, and I went to Walmart and got a set of Crayola Super Tips for like $10. Now a much more affordable way to try it out. Story 16. Gardening. I set out with the goal to garden without spending any money. I compost food scraps, cardboard, and spent soil from houseplants in old plastic cat litter buckets. I gather fallen leaves for mulch and strong and/or thick branches for building up a small barrier around the edge and staking others in the ground to encourage spiders and dragonflies to hang out and catch the bad bugs. Put cardboard down to eliminate grass. My area is small though, so I let a bunch of the grass grow long, then pull it out with the roots. I spent under $5 for seeds and just harvest seeds and replant or let the herb seeds spread. Story 17. Golf. You can get some second-hand clubs that will fit you for free off Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree, etc. with a bit of looking. Pitch and putt golf for 9 holes is about a tenner in the UK. People think it's expensive, but it doesn't have to be at all. Story 18. Surprisingly, 3D printing. You can get a high-quality printer and a good amount of material for under $500. But then you start printing stuff, and it honestly pays for itself. No, I'm not talking about selling prints, although a lot of people do. I'm talking about making functional parts on your printer. My printers have more than paid for themselves with car parts, repair parts, storage, tools, and everything else. If it's made of plastic, I don't buy it anymore. I just print it for pennies instead. Hell, I saved over $500 last week because the case for my car's key fob broke, but the fob itself was fine. Of course, the manufacturer doesn't sell just the case. I would have needed an entire key assembly plus programming fees. Even though I didn't need programming, they wouldn't sell it to me without that. I found a free model online in less than 5 minutes and printed it in 2 hours for less than 10 cents of filament. Or, the feet for my roller bag broke on my last trip. Do I buy another bag for $75? Or do I design new feet and print them for about 5 cents of filament? Even more simple stuff. My girlfriend got me a model train that I wanted to display on the wall in my living room. Nothing online looked decorative enough for a living room, and they were all 20. One free online model and 50 cents of filament later, and it has a nice decorative wall-mounted holder. Of course, you can also print decorative prints. I've also had some coworkers ask me for prints, and I'll do one that costs me less than $1 of filament, and they'll give me 20 to 30 for it. If you can do 3D modeling, CAD, Blender, then that's even better because now you're making your own models. Once you start using it, you find uses for it everywhere. 3D printing is so useful, and nowadays it's so easy. Story 19. Golfing can be a relatively inexpensive hobby depending on the availability around you. I bought my full set of irons at Goodwill for $20, and I've used those for the past 3 years. I could have walked out with everything needed for probably $40 at Goodwill, but I splurged on a putter, driver, and bag from a used sporting goods store. There's a public course near me where I can play 9 holes for $20 or 18 holes for $40. At the driving range near me, I can spend $20 on a bucket of balls that last about 2 hours. Story 20. Electronics. Most of the software is free like KiCad, prototype circuit boards, soldering supplies, and components are now under 50 to 100. Plenty of free YouTube videos about electronic design and theory. You can build a simple RGB LED project for about 20 worth of parts. Story 21. Poker. You can play for pennies. If you lose a lot of money playing poker, you moved up before you were beating the game. You should win 50 buy-ins before moving up stakes. If you play a game where you haven't beaten the previous level, you are asking for trouble. Story 22. I got one. LARP. A lot of people think you need to invest tons into expensive weapons and costumes and spend hundreds to go to events, but at least in NA there is a free weekly LARP called AmpGuard played all over. Every weekend you can just show up and do some LARP fighting, no cost. People loan equipment and can usually teach you how to build it yourself. It's great exercise, tons of fun, and you'll instantly have a huge friend group. Story 23. Music production. Sure, you can spend on crazy gear and setups, but really there is a kid right now somewhere making a banger with a piece of cracked software from 10 years ago, a set of busted headphones, and his dad's old work laptop. Like, it's easy to get carried away with fancy gear, but really all you need is access to a cheap computer, some decent headphones, and a will to create. Story 24. Pétanque. You only need a set of boules, which are steel balls, so it's kind of a one-time purchase, and then you are set for life. No special court needed. You can play on any dirt surface. You might need an opponent, but you can play just to practice hitting one boule with another from 6 to 10 meters. Story 25. Can only speak from experience, but comic book collecting. If you don't mind the mass-produced, non-rare ones, you can start anywhere with a few bucks. I've been collecting since I was 9, and I only have like 2.5 stacks. Termites and collecting graphic novels got in the way, but it goes to show you can really do it at your own pace and price. Story 26. Online Scrabble. Sure, you're thinking I've got to get the hat and the jacket, and the special grip gloves, and the water bottle, and the special performance water. But it's online. Nobody will know if you get knockoffs or used items, tap water, and a fake label you make yourself, etc. Story 27. Photography, videography. Nowadays, most smartphones can create images and videos that no sub-1000 system 20 years ago could have done. Even if it's not a large 35mm format sensor or with high bitrate, you're able to capture memories and store them so easily and cheaply. If anything, that's the tech I wish I had back then to easily capture my daughters growing up. I have so many CDs and mini DVs that's now considered ancient. It's all in the lighting, but you can get creative enough to create amazing photos and videos. Sure, there are limitations with every device, but you can learn practice and learn most basic skills with today's phones. Story 28. People are only saying hobbies that sound inexpensive. I'm gonna really do this. Sailing. Yes, yachts are expensive, but I've bought a couple little boats over the years. I had a Sabot, very small dinghy, fit in the back of our minivan, came with everything. $400. We kept it beside our garage. We would take it to small lakes or the bay on calm days and really enjoy sailing along to little picnic spots. Story 29. Wood carving is a nice cheap hobby. All you need is a knife and block of wood soap. Get some Irish Spring for cheap and just start cutting away. Once you get the basic idea, you can start working on the wood. Extra tools can add some extra expense, but not much overall. Band-aids may add to your costs, depending on how much care you take. Story 30. Cooking. Lifetime skill that will last till you pass. Save money from takeout and eating out. Make whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want, with any amount you want, from the comfort of your own home. Nourish your body with ingredients that you choose to put in your food. Great self-care and mindfulness activity to do for grounding and being present. And the way to people's hearts is their stomachs. You can express your love to those you care about through your food. All you need is a knife, sharpener, cutting board, basic pot, pan, spatula, and tongs, all of which you can get from yard sales and thrift stores. Can even upgrade with appliances if you'd like. Story 31. Gaming is as expensive as you make it. Sure, you could buy a new game every time your ADHD brain gets bored of what you have, but you could also just play the games you already have. Same goes for the hardware. Most people at least have a cheap laptop or something, which can play a lot of things. You might have to play on minimum graphics, but at least you can play. It only gets pricey when you want top-of-the-line stuff. Story 32. Substances. No, really. I am not saying it's smart or a good idea, but by all sources available, it has never been cheaper to get high-impact substances, sometimes even sent to your door. So yeah, if you are a substances user, these are really your salad days. Story 33. Mini painting. Once you have a nice set of brushes and some paints, you only really need to spend money on minis. And they're not that expensive, especially if you buy in bulk from eBay or something. The paints and brushes will last a long time if you take care of them. And the minis will provide hours and hours of entertainment while painting, and afterward as you show them off or use them in games. Story 34. Hobby-grade RC cars. You could get a 3S Arma or Traxxas truck new for $400, $500 with batteries and some spare parts. Less if you find secondhand. It's not cheap, but $500 for one that handles well, can go for over an hour, 2 batteries, and tops out over 50 miles per hour. If you drive smart, you won't need new parts for quite some time. Story 35. Mountain biking. The most fun I've ever had getting exercise, and the most exercise I've ever gotten having fun. I bought my mountain bike in 2007. Yes, it cost about $3,500, but I've been riding it for 18 years. Buy quality, and it lasts. Only about $200 per year for fun, healthy exercise. Story 36. Hand tool woodworking. If you're willing to restore the tools yourself, good quality but old tools can be very inexpensive, though it varies a lot by location. Really, you only need a couple of hand saws, files, chisels, a 4 Stanley plane, some marking tools, and a brace with bits. A couple $100 can get you going, and the tools will outlast you. Check out Rex Kruger and Paul Sellers on YT. Like most hobbies, you can also spend tens of thousands of dollars on very beautiful antique or new, niche versions of the same tools. Answer. Yup, I've been trying to build my tool set recently and prefer some of the older used stuff. Some of the newer ones have some mixed, cheap material that breaks so easy. The 75 multi-tool I bought last year broke, knife chipped, after a few uses. The old multi-tool prior I had for 15 years without issue, which I unfortunately lost. Also, used tools have the advantage of looking used. My dad bursted in laughter when I opened up my unused drill set, and it still had some of the tags and wrapping on it, LOL. He jokingly said, "Clearly, I don't lift a finger around the house." Story 37. Disc golf, as long as you don't get hung up on the gear like most do. That and drawing, painting, most hobbies can be cheap if you stay focused on the hobby and not the gear. So many people think it's the money or gear, when it's the fulfillment that you should spend your energy and efforts on. Story 38. You won't win races with a beaten-up boat with bags for sales, but you will have a blast, meet new people, and learn a ton about yourself, adversity, challenge, and keep your brain and body active. Story 39. Hardware projects making. Most parts are very cheap, and you don't need a lot to start building your projects. A Atmega is around $2, but you can spend a ton of money if you want to. 3D printers start around $150. You could build your own drone under $20. Another one is playing the guitar. I taught you need an expensive one with an expensive amp. I spend $1,000 in everything just to sell everything 5 years later. Then I bought a cheap guitar, $160 an amp, $100, and it really doesn't sound that different. After all, it's more about the skill than the tech. Story 40. Scuba diving, particularly in California. Between expensive housing required to store gear, colder water, and bigger waves, tons of people will sell their gear for next to nothing. I got a full set of gear for free from one guy's listing. It used to be $300 to get certified at the cheapest shop. This year, it went up to $400. Lots of shops have cheap air fills to get you in the door. For under $2K, you can become a dive master and get free air and make a few dollars. Theoretically, you can find some free gear from online listings. Teach yourself at the beach and on YouTube. Photoshop a fake certification card on your computer. Get free tank fills when shops have them, and pay nothing. Story 41. Most hobbies can be done on the cheap or be as expensive as you want them to be. Example, running. Get yourself a 30 pair of shoes and you'll be fine. Or go buy a 200 of Hoka's. I've run ultra races and have bought most of my shoes used off eBay and most of my gear from Target. Story 42. Fishing. Fly fishing. I've been lucky enough to go all over the country to do both. Capitalism, marketing, and social media have creeped in to make it seem like you need the best gear to enjoy it. I have a 35 Temu fly rod and reel that performs just as well as my 300 Orvis setup. I have 100 waders and 50 boots, and 200 waders and 200 boots. They both work the same. Just buy good line. Kind of like how you need good tires. The line does all the work. Read a fishing report before you go the river and buy 10 worth of flies from the local fly shop that matches the fishing report, and you're having a good time. Story 43. Fly fishing. At least in the summer, you can get a pretty decent beginner setup for $300. Mail order flies, and that's really all you need to get going. Tenkara, think fly fishing without a reel, is less expensive than that. Fly fishing has a reputation for being crazy expensive because people will buy 1,500 rods and put 800 reels on them, but that isn't necessary at all. Story 44. Fishing. Most guys will say you need a boat or hell, even a kayak, but you can have a blast and catch plenty of fish from the bank. I've been fishing all my life, and I would much rather walk the bank solo with 100 or less worth of gear than days I've had out on a bass boat with all the gear you could ever want. Same fish you're pulling out the water at the end of the day. And unless your skill level is pro, it's darn near more luck and patience than it is anything else. Story 45. Stamp collecting. No one collects anymore, so stamps are basically worthless after like 1930, which is what I collect. There are a few out there that are expensive in unused condition, but the vast majority are dirt cheap and you can buy them by the pound. For like 30, you can get a book and like 10 pounds of stamps. Story 46. Any old guy who has a garage sale will give his stuff away. Story 47. Sewing. At the true basics, you need a needle, thread, scissors, and a seam ripper, and an iron and ironing board, which most people should already have. Take something you already own or found at a thrift store and change it. Super cheap. Machines can get expensive, but even a basic machine is pretty affordable these days. It's a good tool to have around the house, and a mid-range machine should last decades with some TLC. Obviously, as you progress with your skill, it can get very expensive when you start getting all the useful doodads, like most hobbies. But the basics are pretty simple. Story 48. Coffee roasting. You can spend lots of money on a roaster or watch some YouTube videos on how to roast with a stainless steel dog food bowl, a heat gun, and a whisk. I have been doing that for over 6 years. Can make a premium espresso roast and save lots of money in the process. Story 49. Learning music or an instrument. You can buy good or decent instruments fairly cheap, especially used. Heck, you can even make instruments from household objects, like a washtub bass. If you have young kids, ukuleles are on the cheap. 20 through 40 is money well spent on possibly fostering an interest in music at an early age. Story 50. Miniatures. You can make them out of things you already have around your house. My biggest expenses early on were decent glue, 5, X-Acto knives, blades, and acrylic paint. It gets a little more expensive when you start building structures, but even that is pretty cheap. It's just when you get into 3D printing or using hot wire or specialty saw blades that it gets a little more expensive. Story 51. Not sure if it's been mentioned here, but photography. I have a friend that easily spends 40 to 50K a year on something you can totally do for probably $250 on a used DSLR. I get that's not peanuts, but it's pretty cheap. May need a computer to see your pictures, but you don't really need the most expensive one. And to add, you don't need much after that, which is a major perk. A lot of hobbies require consumables. Story 52. Art, specifically visual 2D. You could get some nice materials, but you could also steal some printer paper and a pen from an office. You could get big pieces of cardboard from a dumpster. You could smear mud on a sidewalk in a specific aparter. You could drag a stick through sand at the beach. The world is rife with art-making materials for little to nothing. Story 53. Hunting and fishing. They get a lot of sideways looks because redneck, but in reality, they are some of the best ways to connect with nature and even lower your grocery bill. A lot of people think both are prohibitively expensive, but in reality, it's like $50 for a license for both, and you can get gear pretty cheap. Story 54. Sailing, specifically racing. The captain spends a fortune on the boat, but the crew only needs a life jacket and gloves, which can be $100 altogether, plus beer, which can add up. If you live near the water, people are always looking for extra crew for local races. Story 55. Fishing. Yes, it can easily run 6 figures if you buy a boat and dozens of top-end rods and reels and all the shiny stuff on the shelf. But you could literally spend a week fishing a river for under $100 and do it again next month with almost no new investment. Story 56. Coins collecting. Unless you go specifically for gold or anything super rare, you can buy unsorted world coins by weight for under 30 to 50 cents a piece and spend hours sorting and cataloging them, reading about the respective countries and symbols on the coins. Story 57. Manually adjusting belts helps me think more about what I'm doing, and the cheap tools are teaching me how to sharpen properly. Getting pretty good at it too. Story 58. Brewing beer. For the simple cost of ingredients, a 5-gallon pot and bucket, a sieve, thermometer, bottle basic cleaning chemicals, and some leftover beer bottles, you can make world-class beer at home. Average ingredient cost for a decent 6 ABV beer is $40 for 5 gallons. Story 59. Golf. Everyone views it as a high-class sport, but it's only as expensive as you want it to be. Looking at Facebook Marketplace right now, looks like you can get a set of clubs in a bag for $50 to $100. A few used golf balls will only cost you $10, and that's if there aren't any left in the bag you buy. After that, there are plenty of cheap driving ranges. Local one is 105 balls for $15. The 9-hole course near me is $8. The only big expense is lessons if you want to get better quick. Easiest way is to just go with someone who knows what they're doing and listen to their tips. Story 60. Define cheap. You can get a running, cool-looking 70s classic car for $2K and then slowly get junkyard parts and do work yourself to restore it. That's cheaper than classic car restoration. Probably sounds to most people, but still talking thousands per year in parts and tools. Plus, it's addictive and it escalates. Story 61. I started making little cooking videos. All you need really is your phone and then just whatever you're cooking. I bought a 25 selfie stick stand eventually, but you don't really need it. They aren't great videos, but I have fun making them. And I started doing it with just food I was going to make anyway for dinner or whatever. Story 62. Coin collecting. It can be expensive. In fact, the sky is the limit, but it can also cost nothing. Dig through your change. Even buy old customer deposited rolls of coins from the bank. Sort through them and return them to the bank, keeping only what you want. Story 63. Cross-stitch can be relatively cheap. Sure, there are doodads you can add on if you get serious, but the basic materials don't cost too much. A single skein of embroidery floss typically runs under $1. Embroidery hoops, to hold the fabric, run around $5. A pack of 5 tapestry needles is under $10, and the cloth, either Aida cloth or linen, varies in price, but you can get a good-sized piece of cloth for under $10. You can pay for patterns, or even for kits, but there are loads of free patterns out there. Story 64. Crocheting isn't terribly expensive to get started with. Just need a hook and a ball of yarn to start. Also, you can find cheap cross-stitch kits and rug latching kits on Amazon for beginners. Running can be cheap. Just a pair of headphones and some running shoes. Story 65. Junk journaling. You can make journal books out of all kinds of things. Scrapbook paper, book magazines pages, hymn book pages, coloring book pages, etc. And decorate with watercolors, paint, washi tape, ephemera, ticket stubs, receipts. It's very creative, relaxing. Story 66. Board gaming can be pretty cheap if you're willing to buy stuff used, stick to smaller games, pick up stuff at garage sales, that sort of a thing. And some fairly widespread, easily found, affordable games have a huge amount of content and replay value as long as you like the core mechanics. Significantly cheaper than movies, heck, anything that you would have to drive more than a few minutes away to. Now, on the other hand, if you keep buying all the new, biggest, flashiest games with all the deluxe pieces, yes, it can get pretty expensive quickly. Good thing I have a nice steady job at the moment. Fingers crossed. Story 67. A lot of musical instruments you can get a pretty decent starter instrument for under $200. Don't discount the idea of pawn shops and buying used elsewhere. I got a nice enough acoustic guitar for about $250 new. A bass guitar that sounds great at a pawn shop for $200. You can get a decent ukulele for around $150. And there's other things like kalimba, hand drums, harmonica, even a starter keyboard for not much. You could also get into weightlifting for pretty cheap. People buy workout equipment all the time, don't use it, and sell online for a fraction of what they paid. You might not find a squat rack for dead cheap, but you can find weight plates and bars and benches for next to nothing. Story 68. Bouldering. Apart from some shoes and chalk, you're pretty much set. Most of the other equipment, like crash pads, other people you climb with provide. It's quite fruitful in the sense you meet a lot of amazing people and get to see a lot of beautiful nature. You also gain a lot of respect for nature, even if you're not that way inclined. Story 69. Coffee roasting isn't too expensive. My first roaster was actually a popcorn popper. Then it broke, and I replaced it with another one for $3 from a thrift store. Then I decided to level up and got an entry-level airbed roaster for $200. You still have to buy green coffee, but it just takes the place of roasted coffee. It's not a new expense that you have to add to your budget. Story 70. Brewing beer. For about $1,000, you can get all the excellent equipment you really need that will last a lifetime. And when you brew 5 gallons, 40 pints, the ingredients will cost you far less than $2 per pint for much better beer than you will ever get from a commercial brewery, because you can cheaply add grains and flavor they can't afford to add. I will caution that not everyone has the personal constitution to have faucets in their home that dispense good beer. You have to be disciplined. Story 71. Playing an instrument. Initial startup cost will cost you a penny, but if you're determined, you can learn on your own. And a few lessons can help you develop technique. Avoid things like carpal tunnel, difficulty due to a lack of understanding things like hand motion, ease of motion, and anchoring. That being said, contrary to popular belief, a great beginner instrument doesn't mean cheapest, given that most beginners don't have the skills yet needed to work around a poorly performing instrument. Story 72. Filmmaking. You're probably on a phone right now. Shoot your movie with it. Edit your footage with free editing software. Write your script on Google Docs. Get your friends to act. Use locations and props that you already have, like your apartment and your friend's apartment and whatever's in them. Story 73. Real deal French copper cookware. If you are willing to learn how to identify generic, vintage Mauville and other high-quality, unbranded old copper pans, it can easily be cheaper than buying all-clad to cook with the highest-performing pans available, and almost certainly cheaper than using all non-stick pans and replacing them when they go sticky. Story 74. Geocaching. A lot of people think any outdoor hobby is going to be expensive because of outdoor gear prices. But literally, you just need a smartphone and trinkets and/or a pen if you want to trade items or sign the logbook. I haven't done it in a while, but it's essentially a scavenger hunt, and they're all around. Story 75. Everyone here is stating, shoot, that I already assumed wasn't all that expensive. Gaming? Shoot, kids nowadays are becoming gamers on their hand-me-down cell phones. On the contrary, I'd like to point out that I fudge love golf, and you can get into it for so much cheaper than many think. Story 76. Birding is extremely simple to get into, even though it kind of glitters with insanely high-end optics. Binoculars, field guide, and you're kinda there. Now granted, It's easy to fall in love with top-of-the-line binoculars and add a scope. I did both over the years, but the gear list is so short that it's still a really cheap hobby on an amortized basis, even if you have some crazy 3K pair of binoculars around your neck. The optics are closer to lifetime investments than most hobby gear. Mine are 15 years old and are essentially as new. More typically, to get into it, you use some okay binoculars that someone you know has laying around and buy a 15 field guide or download a free app. Birding mostly gets expensive if you start to travel expressly to see birds. Even at my most avid, though, I never got there. I just packed my binoculars if I was already traveling somewhere with birds to see. Story 77. Crafting. I regularly build stuff for community events out of basically garbage. I get free cardboard from Costco and free crafting materials from Facebook Marketplace. Sure, crafting things can be expensive, and if you have a set idea, it might only be achieved by throwing money on the fire, but there's always a workaround. I'm currently assisting a mini set build for a creepy doll museum, and I haven't spent a penny. So far, I have made tiny books, a sink, a chair, and a bookshelf. There might be more. I can't remember, but totally free. Styrofoam and craft supplies from Marketplace, the rest from my craft supplies. If I was nitpicking myself, I would say that I might have spent a few dollars on glue. Story 78. No one can unplug the server, rescind permissions. No one can control what you do. It will always be there, and it will always be free. Story 79. Guitar maintenance, modding, and repair. If you're savvy, it could even be profitable. Basic tools are affordable, and a lot of the cheap tools on Amazon are still usable. There's a ton of bargains on the used market because people who don't know any better buy new guitars, let them gather dust, and think they're worth way less than they are. A bit of elbow grease and knowledge you can gain from YouTube tutorials can bring them to like new condition. Story 80. 3D printing isn't too expensive and comes in handy. I lost an alarm magnet for a door. I ordered 20 magnets from Amazon and printed a press-fit holder for it in about 20 minutes, including design. Couple of whacks with a rubber hammer and some 3M double-sided tape that came with the magnets. Job done. Story 81. Audio. The tech behind it has been so good for so long that if you know what you're looking for, you can get good gear for really cheap in the used market. The hard part is building up the knowledge to know what to look for. There's a lot of snake oil. Companies will sell 1,000 cables knowing darn well a 20 cable performs just as well. Story 82. Magic. A pack of cards or a few coins are all you need to really start with it. You surely can pay a lot to learn new tricks, especially those that use gimmicks, but you don't need to. As long as you got skill, you can build a decent repertoire of tricks for almost nothing. Story 83. Art. Don't get me wrong, you can spend a lot of money. You can also start with computer paper and a ballpoint pen. But some types of art you can spend less than $100 on. Watercolor painting. A few small but decent brushes will be somewhere between 5 to 10 each. A pan set of watercolors is 25 to 75. Don't get tubes until you know why you'd get tubes. And a watercolor sketchbook is 10 to 20. Printmaking. You need a brayer, about 10. Carving tools, same. Inks, also same. Start with black. And rubber pads to carve, $5 to $25 depending on size. And then whatever you want to print on. I recommend hitting up a thrift store. Cyanotyping, 12 of chemicals, paper, some leaves, the sun, boom. Polymer clay can get expensive, but all you need is some clay, 10-ish a color, tinfoil, and an oven. That said, there's like a millions fun ways to go. Felting. Felting needles, 10 to 15, pads, 10 to 20, but can be DIY'd. And felt, 1 infinity depending on what you want. Do also recommend a tool to hold the needles, 5 to 10, and a handguard, same. Colored pencils. If you're an adult, you want a good set, minimum 20, and that should be a smaller set. But that investment will last you forever. Story 84. Nowadays, with some websites and side loading with a pretty minimal investment, you can get a Nook or a Kobo or any of the plethora of cheap ebooks or iNk tablets and have access to almost any book ever written. Perhaps the best time to be a prolific reader that's ever been. Story 85. Electronic music production. Sure, if you go the traditional route, it can be very expensive to buy a high-end computer, a full-size MIDI keyboard with drum pads, analog synths, nice studio monitors, and a copy of Pro Tools. You don't need to do any of that. Pirate a copy of FL Studio and do it all in the box with your mouse AMD computer keyboard. I did it that way for like 10 years before I finally started getting external gear and bought a legit copy of FL. Story 86. I do fiber crafts and the best ratio of money to entertainment is cross-stitching. You can buy a kit for $40 that you spend a year working on. The expensive bit is framing it, but you can keep them in a drawer forever like I do. I would sit with people crocheting blankets that had 100 worth of yarn that they would finish in 2 weeks, and they would mock me for still working on that same piece. I was broke. I got my money's worth from that project. Story 87. Exercise. Even working with a personal trainer, the money you spend right now to get healthy, gain muscle mass, etc., will save you potentially $100K later in life. Osteoporosis, high blood pressure, falls, etc., all decrease in likelihood if you're healthy and strong. The only thing that won't be cheap is living longer, but I'm happy with that trade-off. Story 88. Triathlon. It has a reputation of being a sport for rich, middle-aged people who make it all about the equipment. It doesn't have to be. If you want to do something like a 70.3 half Ironman, you can do it for $500. Cheap wetsuit, used bike, non-IM branded small event. If you want to be competitive, then yes, you will want nicer bike, but it still doesn't have to cost $10K. Story 89. Drag racing, specifically bracket racing. You don't need a 68 Dart or 69 Camaro. You can take your '06 Tahoe out there and dial it in at 16 seconds and go. It costs less than $100 to enter a race, sometimes like 50, and you can win $1,000 or more for the race. Very minimal entry required. Just a car that drives. Problem is, people want to go fast. Fast. Story 90. I hear paper and pencil is pretty inexpensive. Drawing or writing. Watercolors can be affordable too. Same with art multimedia paper. Sometimes I find art supplies at the thrift that can be useful. If you're lucky, you can sell it and break even. And all time to hone your skills. Even if you have none, gotta start somewhere. Story 91. Sailing. Nothing grates on me more than when people say that sailing is for rich people. It's truly affordable for all income levels. So many state parks have sailing clubs or offer sailing lessons on small sailboats. No rich person is going to a state park to sail. I have 2 sailing clubs near me, and they're both about $150 to $250 per year, including sailing lessons. You pay your membership fee, and then you can take the boats out whenever you want, as long as you've passed your sailing test. Story 92. Honestly, as a person that has tried out a lot of hobbies, the most expensive part is working through the early parts and finding your lane. I got into comics about a decade ago, and I spent a couple $100 trying to figure out what I should be doing. Now that I have a couple of modern titles I like, I buy the couple I like when they come out and will hunt for a collector's item or missing piece at a garage sale or flea market. D&D, I got a bunch of books at the gaming store only because a big part of it is getting off a screen, but I could have printed most of the material off at a library or Kinko's for like $10 and a $7 Art of Dice and you're off. Cooking in season stuff can be really cheap, and even making a really good red sauce from scratch is way better than doing something with a fancy expensive cut of meat. Story 93. Well, rock hounding doesn't sound expensive, though it can get so if you go crazy, but it certainly is quite cheap to get into. Got a 3-pound maul, a cold chisel, safety goggles, and some interesting rocks, or a UV flashlight and live near certain bodies of water, or just willing to take a pie pan out and sift, or pick over some gravel from a stream sandbar. Know where there's an old mine tailings dump or a road cut. You can find some interesting and sometimes valuable stuff in most places, if you know where to look and are willing to take the time to do so. Story 94. Few people are going to agree, but tabletop gaming, Warhammer, Conquest, and so on, is not expensive. While the additional buy-in is expensive, where I live a 2K point army is about $800 to $1,000 total. Cost spread across purchases over a couple of years. Once you reach that critical mass of having a well-constructed army, there isn't much impetus to buy more models unless you are personally interested or chase tournaments. The basis of my Chaos Marine army has stayed the same, once 2016 to now. It's a bit like having a gaming rig with a game that never needs upgrading or gets boring. Certainly I spend less on Warhammer compared to gaming. Story 95. Running. People think you have to sign up for races just to be considered a runner. Just put on runners, put a t-shirt and shorts on, and enjoy yourself. Running shoes also does not even need to be expensive. I got by with Under Armour shoes before upgrading. Story 96. Kayaking. They last forever and use they are pretty cheap. Bought my first for less than 100 and it's the amount of hours I've had it in water is probably approaching 1,000 hours. I don't use it anymore. I admittedly bought a high-end kayak for personal use, but I regularly loan it when I go with friends. Story 97. Photography. You can do more with your phone than people could with flagship cameras from a decade ago. If you do want a real camera, you can get a 3 to 4-year-old flagship and a few nice lenses on eBay for less than some people spend on one gold club. I like photography because you can incorporate your hobby into almost anything. Work trip? Bring the camera. Vacation? Camera. Nephew's soccer game? Camera. It's fun watching YouTube tutorials on different skills to master that make your photography better. Story 98. Any trading card game. As a Magic the Gathering player, tournament decks can easily cost hundreds, even thousands of dollars. But with $50 or so, you can get a starter kit which contains 2 game-ready decks, plus sleeves and deck boxes for them. If you just want to enjoy the game, then that's the way to go. Story 99. Sailing, sailboat racing. There are very inexpensive small sailboats like beach catamarans and monohull dinghies that can be had for less than $1,000. There are often community sailing centers with inexpensive classes and memberships. Bigger boat owners at yacht clubs are often looking for crew to help with races or are happy to show you the ropes, so to speak. Story 100. Literally, photography. I once started thinking I'd need fancy cameras and lenses, but turns out a good phone and natural light can already wonders. Of course, you need to invest if you want to make it for living, but as a hobby, it's more about the eye than the gear. Story 101. 3D printing. Sounds expensive, but one of the most common printers, Ender 3, can be had for $180 on Amazon. A few rolls of filament later, and you can be printing pretty well for $250. Granted, $250 is not cheap to everyone, but as far as hobbies are considered, it's pretty low. A really nice printer, Bamboo Labs A1 with AMS for multicolor or multi-material prints, will set you back $650-ish. Story 102. Art. You can make art from anything, with anything. Yes, higher-level materials can improve overall quality, but to start, you really only need a few basics and practice. You can get essentials at a hardware or dollar store, and the rest is just repetition like any other skill. The whole point of creativity is to just make something, doesn't matter how or what from. Story 103. I'd say playing golf. People call it a rich people's sport, thinking you need to be a country club member and everything. But you can create your own holes in a backyard, a large field, or even a baseball field and chip into areas. Courses have gotten more expensive over time, but you can always chip and putt for free at a driving range or course and hit a small bucket for $8. You can buy very cheap clubs at Goodwill or even golf shops. You can buy the most top-of-the-line clubs, but the player is what really matters on the course and how they handle the course. Story 104. Warhammer miniatures. It seems like you're paying through your nose getting minis, tools, and colors set up. But once you compare it to the time you spend assembling, painting, and playing matches with them, it actually turns out to be a rather reasonable investment per time spent. Story 105. Cycling. People joke about it being a dentist, so a rich people, hobby. But in reality, you can ride a 500 to 600 bike easily for 10 years and over. You don't need the latest carbon whiz-bang and fancy kit. An entry-level bike, cheap shorts, tea, shoes, and a 5-drink bottle is all you need. Only exception is downhill-oriented MTB, which beats the shoot out of your gear. But if you don't do that, yeah, it's as cheap as you want it to be. Story 106. Miniature painting, and by extension, wargaming. I'm not saying it's cheap exactly, but it's a lot cheaper than you'd expect. If you're going to be buying everything official and big brand names, e.g. Games Workshop, you're going to be bleeding cash like crazy. There are, however, other ways. I went into 3D printing. A decent resin printer and supplies sets you back. Let's say you get all properly gadgeted up, €300 or so. Then you'll be printing heaps of quality models for really cheap. Then you'll get some hobby supplies and paints. Especially if you take over a second-hand collection, you're not going to be spending too much initially. I started with €60 and a large box of second-hand paint, some of which is still good for use 5 years down the line. The upfront cost of it all is quite hefty, but not more than many adult hobbies. The cost afterwards is quite low, and the hours of fun you have painting and or playing with the models are many. It's a good ratio. Story 107. Gardening can actually be close to free. Go around town now and collect seeds. Everything is going to seed where I live, RN. Potting soil and nursery pots. $20, that's just for starting seeds indoors in the spring if you live in a colder zone. Hardy perennials reseed right now, so those seeds can just be tossed about and lightly covered and will emerge in the spring. Also, sowing is fun and can also be close to free once you have the machine and textiles you can repurpose. Story 108. Loads of hobbies are like this. People who have been doing it for a long time at an advanced level think all the really advanced doohickeys they always use are essentials instead of nice to have. Like, I do scale modeling and gunpla and have for years, so have like 30 glass files, 50 cutters, 30 sable brushes, 150 airbrush and stuff. But you can pick up starter sets from Amazon with cheap but good enough equipment for like 10. That'll handle 95 of what you need, with the other 5 requiring a bit of very manageable improvising with common household objects. Throw in some cheap paint and brushes and some glue, and you're all set for like 30 to 40 quid. But ask online what you need, and you'll be bombarded with posts telling you absolutely need to throw hundreds at the hobby to really enjoy it. Answer: yeah, the only thing I'd steer people away from is cheap airbrushes if they want to get into airbrushing. It goes one of two ways. You either give up on it because you think you don't get on with airbrushes, or you quickly realize the limitations of cheap airbrushes and then go for the more expensive one you wish you'd bought in the first place. Either way, you've partied too hard with the money. If you go for a decent one to start with, you're more likely to enjoy using it, and if you really don't, it will still have value so can be sold. Story 109. To draw. If you are a beginner and you start, you only need paper and pencil. And if you want to shade the drawings or finish them with drawing techniques, you need expensive colors and so on. But to start, it is cheap and simple. I only use paper and pencil to draw. I don't even color my drawings and they look good. Story 110. Weirdly, Warhammer. Now, if you just want to play the game, my lord, yes, it is expensive. Those are some pricey playing pieces. But if you go full hobby, then it's quite cheap. Pick a box of infantry for $35.50, and you can have hours of fun building and painting them, if that's what you find enjoyable. Even more so is the hours out into crafting the backstory, naming the characters, and planning what that force actually contains. You can easily spend 100 hours on that box of models in total, giving it a price point of 50 CPH. But if you dislike those things and just want to play the game, then that's hours of pain on top of the money. Story 111. Growing your own food. If you have a garden, all you need is a spade and some leftover veg from the supermarket. Getting 90% of a perfect harvest costs nothing. People spend a lot of money just to get that last 10. Depending on what you grow, it can save you quite a lot of money too. Berries, for example, are really expensive, but real easy to grow. Source: me. Story 112. Running. Just a pair of shoes. Clothes really don't matter when you start. Just some leggings, wide shorts, or sweatpants. Skiing. Hear me out. Where I grew up, every other village had its own little T-bar ski lift. There were no passes, just a piece of paper to punch holes into. One ride was 50 CT. And these lifts are still around, just 1 to 2 per ride. That is affordable, especially for kids who are just starting out. There is zero reason to waste money on huge resorts. After some time, you upgrade to a village with 2 to 5 lifts for 10 per day, or for a 50 season pass. Like the village I grew up in. I was in my late 20s and earning good money when I got my first pass for one of the big ski resorts that was 3 figures. As for the equipment, I always got used stuff as a kid. I got my big sister's stuff, and she got it from our cousins who got it from their cousins. Same with ski clothes. I got my first own ski clothes when I was 15, and even then it was just pants to match my normal winter jacket. Bought my first full set at 30. First time owning new ski, 31. As a 90s kid, skiing really was a poor people's sports too. Everybody could afford to learn it and go out with friends. And honestly, these little gems of ski areas are still around as well. Story 113. Miniature painting. People often joke about the plastic crack and how expensive it is, and they're not wrong. The most common way for people to try miniature painting is to have it be a part of the miniature wargaming side of things. And to have an army, you need more models, of course. And plenty of people who get into the hobby, be it wargaming or just the painting, very commonly do turn into kind of hoarders for both paints and tools, as well as models they think look cool and want to paint at some point. But it really isn't that expensive to get into. Warhammer stores have a free Mini of the Month deal every month. So if you have a store near you, You can go into one on the first weekend of a month and get a model for free. To start painting, all you really need is a brush and a few paints. I'd recommend not getting cheap crafting acrylics. They have absolutely horrendous coverage, and you'll end up globbing the paint on too thick to get to opacity with the colors. But all modern miniature paint brands are good enough to paint with. Yes, every single one that is miniature painting focused. Army Painter, Citadel, Vallejo, any one of these will do the job. At home, you make yourself a wet palette with some kitchen roll paper and baking paper. Total cost to try the hobby out, anywhere from absolutely free. If your local hobby store has an introductory session for beginner painters where you paint a free model, to maybe around $30. And if you like it and want to paint more, buying single models and single paints as you need or want them, the hobby can be as expensive as you want it to be. Story 114. I would say mountain biking. It's very expensive on the high end of new stuff, but there are a lot of great older bikes out there that were absolute dream machines a few years ago and cost thousands of dollars that now regularly go in the low hundreds and are way more than capable of what most people would dream of putting them through. Entry-level bikes have also gotten much better over the years, and if you plunk down on a good bike once, you can enjoy it for years with very minimal servicing. I have a dirt jump bike that I've owned for almost 2 decades now and have beat the hell out of it. Rarely need to fix anything. Just keeps going, and I case jumps, overshoot jumps, crash a lot trying tricks, etc. A good bike is a solid investment in fun and exercise. Story 115. Grassroots performance driving. Assuming you have a car, you can do autocross in pretty much any car. They'll classify you so you're competing against similar cars. Some autocross days are as cheap as $20. I didn't break anything or really wear out the car much during autocross days. Story 116. Journaling. And by that, I don't mean bullet journaling. I just mean normal journaling. A lot of people think you need fancy-looking notebooks and fancy pens highlighters like on Pinterest or whatever, and do those fancy artsy spreads. But nope, a simple ballpoint, plain old cheap notebook, and maybe some simple highlighters. Basic pastel ones will do if you're oversensitive to neon colors like me, lol. Will do perfectly fine to vent your thoughts and generally write stuff down, if money's tight. And you don't have to do a fancy welcome spread if you don't want to. Plenty of minimalists in the online communities around that hobby too. I really only have those fancy zebra pastel highlighters because I also love collecting nice stationery items and can currently afford to either refill or replace them if an ink cartridge empties. LOL. But just because me and some others are just hopeless maximalists, and some of us also happen to be an artist on that one, doesn't mean everyone has to be to get into the hobby of journaling in the first place. That it's inherently accessible like that is actually part of the fun. So many different people into that hobby, and since some people actually post entries on that one, so many different perspectives on stuff. Story 117. I think gliding is a lot cheaper than many would imagine. I pay $30 a month for membership, then $8 to get into the sky, and 47p per min glider hire whilst in the sky. This has resulted in me getting a pilot's license for less than $2,000 over a couple of years. I generally spend about $120 a month on it. People think it's going to be as expensive to learn to fly in powered planes, which is about $200 per hour. In comparison, gliding can be as little as $36 per hour.